All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our program this evening. My name is Christy Weininger. I'm the Executive Director of the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museums. And we are so pleased to be working with the United States Mint on this program. Tonight, we are going to learn more about some objects in our collection that are tiny in size, but have really big stories associated with them. So we have a fascinating itinerary for our evening together tonight. First, we will hear from Jennifer Warren, who is with the United States Mint, and she's going to give an overview of the Mint's Presidential Medal Program. Then our historian here at Hayes Presidential, Josh Dubert, will be giving a brief overview of Rutherford Hayes's economic policies, at least as brief as possible, because some of the economic policies get a little complicated. But Josh has some interesting pictures and cartoons and things to share with us. Then we will cut down to our curator of artifacts, Kevin Moore. He will be broadcasting from our exhibit area where the Morgan silver dollar lives. And he'll be sharing some information, a little more information about the Morgan silver dollar and some other presidential medals that we have in our collection. So sit back, enjoy our evening. At the end of our time together, we will have a question and answer session. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and post those in the chat of YouTube, and we will be getting those to our speakers who can take care of those questions at the end of our program. So it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening. Jennifer Warren has been the Director of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs at the United States Mint since 2019. During this time, she worked on key legislation, including the 1921 Silver Dollar Anniversary Act and the circulating collectible coin redesign. She has more than 20 years of experience on Capitol Hill and with the federal government and private sector working on government and policy issues. She has worked for members of the House of Representatives, the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense Education Activity, and the RAND Corporation. Jennifer has a Master of Government Administration from the University of Pennsylvania, where she also worked as the managing editor of the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences journal, The Annals. She was a research and training assistant and a member of an assessment team to Tanzania. At the University of Pennsylvania, she received the 2003 Fells Leadership Award, which is an honorary distinction. Jennifer did additional graduate work at Emory University, conducting psychological research, looking at comparative cognitive development in human children and non-human primates. She conducted research at Yerkes Primate Center and presented her research at several international and national conferences, as well as contributed to several academic published studies. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Let me just take 1 second to show my screen. Okay. Thank you. Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museum for inviting the Mint to participate in this wonderful talk this evening. I'm so happy to be able to join you. Through this connection, I've learned a lot about President Hayes's important connection to the Mint through the Morgan silver dollar. I was asked, though, to talk a little bit about the Presidential Medal series, both in bronze and silver, as well as I wanted to take a few moments about the designer, George T. Morgan. First, I want to point out when we refer to a presidential medal that is used today and for the modern series, it could actually be several types of presidential medals that have been through the years. That includes the peace medals, the inauguration medals, and then what we refer to as presidential medals. Some presidents may have had 1, 2, or 3 of those variations. So first, I want to talk about the first one that had come up, which was the Peace Medal Series, which is how presidential medals started. Presidents gave these medals as a sign of peace with Native American tribes, while also when signing peace treaties with other nations and at other events. The Lewis and Clark expedition actually carried Thomas Jefferson's Peace Medal in 3 different sizes, as well as medals from George Washington's second term. Eventually, these medals shifted from the Peace Medal, ending with Benjamin Harrison, to the Presidential Medal Series, since it seemed the need or the practice of giving these medals had decreased. Additionally, presidents over the years have had inaugural medals. The Mint, however, did not specifically make these except for a short period of time. However, since 1953, these have been made by private mints. Lastly, presidents have what we call the presidential medals. These medals could have been used like a peace medal or for other purposes. For modern presidents, the mint produces those in bronze at the end of each president's term. And actually, next week we will be in one of the special committees. We'll be listening and looking at the design portfolio for President Biden's. In my research, it appears that several presidents, including Rutherford B. Hayes, may have a variation of the medal. Rutherford B. Hayes had both a President Medal, which was his inaugural medal, as well as a Peace Medal. It's unclear if both medals might have been used as a peace medal during his term or for other purposes. Originally, the peace and the presidential medals were not specifically made by the mint, but they were contracted out often to mint employees who used mint equipment during after hours. The Rutherford B. Hayes Medal, however, was the first in the series that the U.S. Mint actually took over medal production. So, what is the Presidential Silver Medal series that the Mint is producing today? The United States Mint has granted approval in 2013 to reissue presidential medals in silver. In 2018, the Mint started issuing this silver series with the George Washington Presidential Silver Medal. Each of these replicates are 99.9% fine silver. The silver medal edges are plain and the finish is matte. The current silver series does feature piece medal designs up to the Ulysses S. Grant medal, with some exceptions that the medals differ from the original designs. So let's talk about Rutherford B. Hayes's medal. It was originally released in bronze in 1877. Slide 1 that I'm showing shows the bronze medal obverse that depicts Rutherford B. Hayes in profile and the inscription Rutherford B. Hayes. This bust actually appeared on several other medals, including the Hayes Indian Peace Medal that was sold in bronze and oval in shape. And that's in slide 2. Oop, there we go. Featured also on several annual essay commission medals during the 1880s, and the miniature presidential medal for the series in the early 1970s that were bronze minted at Philadelphia and Denver, and a 24-karat gold plated produced at Philadelphia. Slide 3 shows the bronze reverse that includes the laurel wreath and the inscriptions Presidents of the United States and inaugurated March 5th, 1877. The designer of the medal was George T. Morgan. The procedure to make the original bronze medal was actually initiated by the Mint director at the time, Linderman, who wrote to the Secretary of Treasury, John Sherman, with his suggestions. It's recorded that 2 dies were manufactured at Philadelphia for this medal, and 26 bronze medals were produced. Slide 4 and slide 5 show the current silver medal. The silver medal is 1 troy ounce of the 99.9% fine silver. The medal is 1.598 inches in diameter, and this medal was actually released in earlier this year in February. So what I think is interesting, and I wanted to take a second to talk about, is the designer, George Thomas Morgan. Morgan was born in Birmingham, England on November 24th, 1845. In England, he worked as a die engraver. He came to the United States and was originally hired at the United States Mint in 1876 as an assistant engraver under William Barber. So he really only came to the Mint shortly before he actually created this President Hayes medal. Eventually, Morgan became the 7th chief engraver of the United States Mint in February 1917. Morgan figured very prominently in the production of pattern coins and designed several varieties of 1877 half dollars, the 1879 schoolgirl dollar, the 1882 shield earrings coin. However, he is most famous for the Morgan silver dollar, as well as the never released $100 gold Union coin. Slide 6 is an actual photograph of George T. Morgan while he was sculpting. Shortly after coming on board at the Mint, I was actually asked by the then director, Dave Ryder, to work with several members of Congress in how we could celebrate the 100th anniversary of the end of the Morgan dollar and the commencement of the peace dollar in 2021. From several conversations with Representative Barr of Kentucky, Representative Cleaver of Missouri, and Representative Amade of Nevada, the 1921 Silver Dollar Coin Anniversary Act was written. Public Law 116-286 was signed into law on January 5th, 2021. The language required the Secretary of the Treasury to honor the 100th anniversary of the completion of the coinage of the Morgan dollar that represented the country's westward expansion, industrial development in the 18th, sorry, in the 19th century, and the commencement of the peace dollar. The Morgan silver dollar was minted from 1878 to 1904, and then again in 1924. And it was minted at the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, the San Francisco Mint, and the former Carson City Mint and the former New Orleans Mint. The law allows for the coin to be issued as a numismatic coin. It's not meant for circulation, but it is still considered legal tender. The public law states that the weight is 26.73 grams with a diameter of 1.5 inches, and it should contain no less than 90% silver and it has reeded edges. The public law also stated that the design should be renditions of the designs historically used. The Mint actually started releasing this recreation in 2021. The designs were recreated from historical assets such as coins, the dies, the high resolution images to capture the Morgan's original intent. In 2021, the Mint produced 5 versions to commemorate the historical mint facilities that made the original coin. The Philadelphia issued coins does not have a mint mark on it because it recognizes the historical absence of a Philadelphia mint mark. San Francisco has the S mint mark and Denver the D mark. Additionally, in 2021, the Philadelphia Mint also issued coins to recognize the former New Orleans Mint with an O Privy mark and the former Carson City Mint with a CC Privy mark. Slide 7 shows the 2024 Morgan obverse that depicts a portrait of Lady Liberty in profile with a cap, flora, and crown, infused with the word liberty adorning her head, while 13 stars and with the inscription E Pluribus Unum in 2024 encircles her. Slide 8 shows the 2024 Morgan reverse with a heraldic eagle with outstretched wings clasping arrows and an olive branch, accompanied by a wreath. The inscriptions on the reverse are United States of America, $1, and God We Trust. The coins are released in proof and uncirculated finish, and they are 99.99% silver, while the original Morgans that were circulated were 90% silver and 10% copper. I had no idea until starting to talk to the Hayes Presidential Library of the connection that President Hayes has to the first struck Morgan that's located at the museum. The designing of both the Morgan silver dollar and the Hayes Presidential Medal ties one of our famous engravers and one of our more popular coins to President Hayes. I look forward to hearing more in this talk about that connection. And then again, I thank the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museum for inviting the Mint to take part in tonight's event. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Josh Dubert. As Christy mentioned, I'm the historian here at the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museums. I'm usually studying a lot about Victorian culture, talking a lot about Victorian culture, but today I'm going to talk a little bit about Hayes's economic policies and share my screen here, a few slides to show you. All right. So, what was known as the money question deeply divided Americans during the last decades of the 19th century. Central to this question was the notion of hard money versus soft money, and also a concept known as bimetallism, which means a monetary system which both gold and silver are minted and acceptable forms of currency. The 19th century hard money advocates were in favor of specie, so gold, silver, so actual metal, while soft money advocates were in favor of paper money, also known as greenbacks specifically, which people could use to pay back their debts at a lower rate. So the two primary issues that the money debate revolved around during the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes were the coinage of silver and the resumption of specie payment. So a little background to this: from the 1790s to 1873, gold and silver were technically both coined. The U.S. Mint determined how much gold and silver went into their respective dollars. The ratio was 16 to 1, or 16 grains of silver for every one of gold. When the silver became scarce in the 1830s, the mint began to undervalue it, and thus miners began to sell their silver to industries that are creating commercial products from which they got a better return. So you can see here in this slide, we have an amphora, and we also have a sort of a cake spatula server here, so products made out of this silver. Those silver dollars hence began to disappear from circulation, and gold became more and more seen as the actual legal tender. During the Civil War, paper bills called greenbacks were issued by the North to help fund the war and to pay soldiers. The government printed over $400 million in greenbacks, which were called that because the backs of the bills, as you can see here at the bottom, were printed in green. The currency was issued only by credit from the US government, and thus greenbacks could not be exchanged for their equivalent in gold and silver coinage. So the term greenback really actually becomes like sort of a pejorative. Before 1862, banknotes themselves could be exchanged for their equivalent in gold and silver, but the Civil War just really puts a stop to this altogether. And not until the Species Resumption Act of 1875 did such an exchange come back into practice. This act called for the redemption of legal tender notes payable in full in the form of specie by January 1st, 1879. So before this, in 1873, a financial panic caused by the bankruptcy of Jay Cook's firm, which was heavily invested and overextended in railroads, forgive me here, set off a chain of subsequent railroad bankruptcies. 18,000 businesses closed and the unemployment rate skyrocketed to 14%. In 1873, Congress passed the Coinage Act, a law that officially abolished the coinage of silver dollars, so effectively demonetizing it. So farmers especially really get up in arms over this, since it resulted in less money being in circulation and ultimately deflation occurring. So this meant that they would have to pay back what they owed to their creditors with dollars that were worth more than when they had borrowed them in the first place. In the late 19th century, crops were fetching prices that were far too low, leading to economic disaster for farmers who, again, are not able to make a profit and pay off their debts ultimately. Therefore, they are in favor of bimetallism because with it came a higher circulation of money and the resulting inflation, which would raise the prices of their goods, and this would help them settle their debts. But as a result of the 1873 Act, farm crop prices fell from 1873 to 1878, and this rural anger really starts to mount because of this. Lithographs, like this one here, were published proclaiming the importance of the farmer and his role in society. In reaction to the growing hostility, a Missouri congressman named Richard Bland introduced a bill that called for the unlimited coinage of silver. So when the bill went to the Senate, it was modified and becomes known as the Allison Amendment, setting parameters, I should say, for the coinage of silver from a minimum of 2 million and a maximum of 4 million per month. So the result is the Bland-Allison Act, which passes in February 15th, 1878. Rutherford B. Hayes here was a proponent of a gold standard and the resumption of payment in the form of specie for greenbacks, which would, as sort of a built-in aim, get rid of greenbacks altogether. So there's a motive for this. He believed that this would restore confidence and stabilize the economy, and he saw it not only as a fiscal, but really a moral obligation, an honest way to revitalize the economy, sort of invigorate commerce, restore public confidence, and provide a national financial stability in the economy. And so Hayes felt that it was really the government's duty to regulate and maintain the national currency, and that the Treasury should be ready to pay out the demands of notes in gold. It was imperative, therefore, to be sure that there was enough gold by January 2nd, 1879, when the Resumption Act commenced. And Hayes' Secretary of the Treasury, John Sherman, who's actually the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman, attempted to build up the gold reserve in order to satisfy this anticipated demand. As a senator, Sherman had aided Lincoln in financial efforts related to greenback currency during the Civil War. So he had a lot of experience in sort of compromising and settling these tricky financial matters that are going on at the time. He actually was someone that accepted the Bland Allison Act, and he suggested to Hayes that he should not veto the bill because there's really no point, because Congress is going to override him anyway. Sherman, perhaps he's sort of attempting to position himself politically. He actually had ambitions for the 1880 Republican nomination for the presidency. Hayes, on the other hand, knowing he's only serving one term, can kind of take the high road here, and he's able to act as he saw conscionably fit on the issue of a single gold standard. So in the end, the 1875 Specie Resumption Act really helps to attract investors during a depressed economy, for they believe that the nation is rebuilding on this foundation of gold. Hayes had made it clear that he would veto any bill that came across his desk related to silver, stating in regard to the Bland bill in the House in particular that, quote, "It is now almost a certainty that a silver bill will pass in such a shape that I must withhold my signature," end quote. So it was not the actual coinage that really gets Hayes up in arms and that he really deplores, but the fact that it's not equal to the value of gold. So in his veto message on February 28th, Hayes observed that the 1877, value of the silver dollar was roughly 90 to 92 cents compared to the gold dollar, and, quote, "Thus the silver dollar authorized by this bill is worth 8 to 10% less than it purports to be worth, and is made a legal tender for debts contracted when the law did not recognize it as lawful money." So the central issue here was that with silver, debts could be paid with money that was worth less than it had been when it was actually borrowed. So an exemplification of the maximum of bad money really pushes out good money. Hayes was of the simple belief that metal should be exchanged for in metal and no less. That makes sense. Quote, he said, "If the country is to be benefited by a silver coinage, it cannot be done by the issue of silver dollars of full value, which will defraud no man," quote. So furthermore, pumping silver into the economy caused inflation, which farmers are in favor of because it adds more money to the economy, as I mentioned. But it also diluted the national economic structure by devaluating the currency and made the U.S. actually weaker on the world stage. So economically, international powers were using less and less silver as a form of international exchange. Ultimately, the altered Bland bill, which becomes the Bland-Allison Act, was passed over President Hayes's veto and was the only bill to become law during his single term without his signature. However, Hayes resolved to limit the amount of coinage production to the low end of the 2 million. There's that 2 to 4 million that I mentioned. So he's trying to limit it to 2 million, while at the same time keeping silver's value equal to that of gold. So apropos of our discussion here today, it was actually the passing of the Bland-Allison Act and the large quantities of silver that enter the economy because of it that allowed for the creation of the Morgan silver dollars. However, despite the government's investment in silver and the hopes that it would really sort of augment the markets, trade did not improve and the value of the silver dollar continued to decline. It's actually the importation of more gold from overseas that helped crop prices improve and ultimately end the depression of the 1870s. Now, this is a great slide here I'll talk about in a second. You can see that I'm going to sort of bring this down here. I don't know if that makes a difference. The so-called money question, as I mentioned, had split both the Democratic and Republican parties before Hayes's election. So interestingly, neither Hayes nor Tilden, his opponent, had mentioned it in their speeches during the election of 1876, as they knew it's really going to be a subject that's going to cause sort of inter-party factions and it's going to interfere with elections. So he's really careful because he doesn't want to cause friction with bimetallist Republicans in the Midwest who might shift the outcomes of state and local elections if they're provoked by his hard money position. So the Bland-Allison Act, which ultimately passed by a vote of 164 to 34 in the Democratic-led House of Representatives, was interestingly not an indicator of partisan politics and a good example of why Hayes and Tilden shied away from taking a hard stance about it in their respective platforms. I'm just going to stop to talk about this comic, which is, I think, a great exemplification of this idea. So you see the deformed tiger, how well they pull together. And what's going on here is you have Samuel Tilden on the left, and he's a hard money advocate, and you have Thomas Hendricks, his running mate, on the right, soft money advocate. And so this is the the presidential nominee and the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. And you can see they're just they're split or pulled apart on this very notion. So you can see this sort of a sectionalism also happening in these political parties. And to further give an example of this, so several Ohio Republicans actually voted for the passage of the Bland-Allison Act, including Hayes's own Ohio Congressman, Charles Foster, a hard money supporter, Jacob Donaldson Cox, and even, believe it or not, William McKinley, future president of the United States, who would later run as a hero of the gold standard in 1896. And here you can see his little campaign poster. He's literally actually standing on a gold coin. So it's kind of funny that he's voting, in favor of silver. By President Grover Cleveland's administration in the mid 1880s, the silver dollar is worth around about 85% of that gold dollar. This meant that Americans were keen to use silver to pay their debts while saving their gold. So they're kind of trying to hoard the gold. As historian Troy Seneca in his recent biography of Cleveland points out, compounding this was the obligation of the federal treasury to issue payment in gold, while at the same time they're accepting payment made in silver. So you can see how this is really problematic. The Great Economic Panic of 1893 had its roots in a loss of gold from the U.S. Treasury. So the Sherman-Silver Act that's passed in 1890 called for 4.5 million ounces of silver to be mined and minted per month into coins, which would back this paper currency. This act, combined with the failing of the powerful Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, set off this sort of financial crisis as European investors start to panic. They begin rapidly withdrawing their gold out of fears that the U.S. is abandoning the gold standard. To give you an example of how extreme this was, they withdrew over 50 million in gold in 1892 alone. And this occurs just about 10 days after Cleveland takes office. Talk about a crisis that you got to just sort of jump into here. The economic controversy between the factions of gold and silver increased as the nation approached the 20th century and became the central issue of the 1896 election between, again, Republican William McKinley and Democrat William Jennings Bryan, we see here. Bryan gave a powerful speech at the Democratic National Convention that earned him the presidential nomination. And in it, he really galvanizes the pro-silver factions by putting the farmers' plights into these dramatic, very almost like biblical terms in his statements. And what he says is, quote, "Burn down your cities and leave our farms, and your cities will spring up again as if by magic. But destroy our farms, and grass will grow in the streets of every city in the country." His speech concluded with this really electrifying closing lines that sort of, again, galvanizes the whole crowd. And he says, quote, he sort of shakes his fist, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." And so you see here Bryan with his cross of gold and his sort of crown of thorns he's holding up, sort of the hero of silver. And as a result of this speech, Northern industrialists, though, that are terrified by his calls for free silver and inflation, start to pour millions into the Republican sort of coffers and campaign of William McKinley, who's going to win the election and pass the Gold Standard Act of 1900, which officially puts an end to bimetallism. And as you can see here, we have gold, righteous gold, standing over the plain silver. And one of the most interesting things of this comic, I think, is you see the broken sword of 16 to 1 for the ratio of silver to gold. But in the end, both gold and silver end up losing out to paper currency, which since 1971, when President Nixon terminated the convertibility, I should say, of the dollar into gold, has been since the standard in the United States. stop share here if I can get over to it. Here, having a little issue stopping my share. Oh, there we go. All right, sorry about the delay there.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Moore, and I'm the curator of artifacts here at the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museum. And so I wanted to share with you some items from our collection related to, of course, the Morgan silver dollar. But also I wanted to share a couple things that are related to what Jennifer talked about earlier, and that is peace medals. So I was curious what we had in our collection by way of peace medals, and we have a couple interesting items. The first one is we mentioned, these peace medal tradition goes all the way back to George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson, of course, had peace medal as well. And he sent these out on Lewis and Clark expedition and so forth. But Hayes actually has one, and I'm going to come up and show it here. And so the Jefferson Peace Medal was made of silver, but it's not solid. It was cast in these thin sheets, obverse and then the reverse, and they were kind of fused together and hooked together with this loop. And so Hayes came by one of these. This medal was given to a Native American chief, and then somehow it made its way to a collector in Cleveland. And that collector then ended up sending it to the White House as a gift while Hayes was president. And so that's a cool thing that Hayes had in his collection. And, he was a collector of all sorts of Americana. He was kind of an amateur historian and curator in his own right. So that's a really cool piece that we have in our collection. And another thing that Jennifer mentioned was, of course, Hayes had a peace medal with his likeness made in it. And one thing we have, so his is the first to be oval in shape. And so one thing we have is these silver castings of the die that was used to strike those medals. Now, the Hayes Indian Peace Medal was never produced while he was president. Designs were made, but administratively, the Mint and the Indian office kind of drug their feet. So these were never produced and circulated while Hayes was president. But they did start making a few of them during the James Garfield administration. And this piece comes with a letter in our collection that was given to Lucy. So these silver casts of the die were sent to Lucy by the superintendent of the U.S. Mint at the time in 1879. His name was A. Luton Snowden. And he wrote to Lucy, "Dear Mrs. Hayes, I send with this note impressions in fine silver of the Indian Peace Medal of 1877, which bears upon its obverse the head of your honored husband. The dies from which these impressions are taken, although a long time in course of preparation, have been completed within a brief period. The oblong shape is the first in that form ever struck. On full consultation, it was believed to be the most appropriate for the primary purpose intended, to wit, to be suspended as a charm or a badge of honor upon the breast." So these were designed to be worn and carried like a necklace. And then in our collection, we also have Hayes's copy of his own medal, and I'll show that here. This was a copy that he collected. And interestingly enough, his own copy was not one of the earliest runs. The earliest runs of his peace medal on the reverse will say peace and then 1877. Later runs of it kind of got rid of the 1877 and they reused some of the designs that they used for Garfield's peace medals. So Hayes, interestingly, had the one that he had collected with his own face on it was one of the later editions. So he probably acquired it a little bit later on in his life. Now, on to the Morgan silver dollar. As Josh explained, the impetus behind the Bland Allison bill and the competition between gold and silver. Of course, the silver factions ended up getting a good compromise in the Bland Allison bill. So it was decided that we were going to create a silver dollar. And so designs for that were already being drawn up before the passage of the bill and Hayes's veto. And of the competing designs, George Morgan's ended up being selected as the winner. And so they ended up striking it on March 11th, March 11th, 1878. And so there is copy about this in the newspapers. They published in the newspapers on March 13th, 2 days later, in papers around the country. This particular paper that I have a clipping of is the Philadelphia Times. But I include this because I love the way it's described in the press. So I'm going to share a little bit of this with you. The headline is "The First New Dollar: How They Dropped Through the Press and Who They Were Given to. The mint has begun to grind its grist. Tomorrow, Colonel Bosbyshell, chief coiner, will turn over his first batch of struck pieces to Superintendent Pollock, who will at once pass them on to various sub-treasuries through which they are to be let loose upon the public. The first of the new silver dollars, the planchet or blank, rolled down the deformed silver dollar, rolled down into a catch box with a chink, a poor, blurred, deformed silver dollar that had to be melted over again. So the very first run, we at the Hayes Museum have the first Morgan silver dollar, but technically speaking, we don't. The first Morgan silver dollar was defective and had to be destroyed. Dollar number 2 came out glittering and perfect. That's the veto coin. Some unofficial bystander whispered, smiling. And someone else asked, "The veto coin? How so?" "Why, the first piece goes to President Hayes. No doubt that His Excellency will jingle it in his pocket to some sad tune." You see, these first pieces of the press are specimens for official distribution. They are called the blanks. So I love that little bit of newspaper kind of partisanship in there, that he's going to be jingling this gifted coin into some sad tune. It's a good example of the politics of the time. And so they had 10 of these struck as blanks to be given to notable people. Hayes had requested that he should get the first coin. The second one ended up going to John Sherman. And then the other ones were given to other notable officials at the mint and elsewhere in government. So this was in our collection. Hayes kept it in his collection. And when the museum opened here on our property at Spiegel Grove, right next to President Hayes's home, the museum opened in 1916. The Morgan silver dollar, the first one, went on display. And along with it was a note certifying it. This was on display until probably 1968, when the museum underwent a notable renovation. There was a big redesign and new exhibits were made. The Morgan silver dollar went off exhibit and went off display, as did its certificate. And so it was kind of forgotten by the public that we even had it, unless you were a coin enthusiast, part of the numismatic crowd. Well, in the late 70s, there was renewed interest in the Morgan silver dollar. And a numismatic researcher came here to our site to do some research and wanted to see the Morgan silver dollar. And so we pulled it out. And we actually have 2 in our collection. One is labeled as the first, and then the other one is labeled as a Morgan silver dollar that was produced on day 2. So not the second ever, but was produced sometime on day 2. And so there was some confusion on the part of the researcher whether or not this was in fact the original Morgan silver dollar. And so follow-up research was done the following year in 1980 by a numismatic researcher named Leroy Van Allen. Leroy Van Allen was a researcher who really pioneered a lot of research into Morgan silver dollars. Him and another coin researcher, his name was A. George Mallis, they developed a categorization system, a classification system for Morgan silver dollars. As these became more of a collector's item, people began to notice certain discrepancies between different Morgan silver dollars, and not just fluke errors or random mistakes. They noticed that certain silver dollars all have certain blemishes or certain characteristics. Scratch here, an extra bump here, slightly worn on the design over here. And what Van Allen and Mallis did is they created a classification system called the VAM system, and they started classifying all these defects, and they started numbering them, VAM1, VAM2, and so forth. And they published it in a book in 1976, and they really wrote the seminal book on how to identify your Morgan silver dollar if you're a coin collector. Well, Leroy Van Allen and another numismatic researcher named Pete Bischel came here in 1980 to do some research to try to authenticate our Morgan silver dollar. And so we pulled it out and they looked at it, and they had suspected that the original first Morgan silver dollar would have been using what they termed the VAM9 die. And so they examined it very closely, and they were able to confirm that it had all the characteristics that they were looking for, that this was very likely one of those first runs. But the first silver dollar wasn't the only one to be run on that particular die press, the VAM9. And what I'm holding here, by the way, is a copy of an article that they published in 1980 for Coin World magazine, describing the whole experience and how they did this. But the missing piece, the smoking gun that they were looking for, was they wanted that certificate of authenticity from the U.S. Mint. What they were looking for was this. This is a letter to President Hayes from the chief coiner of the Mint. His last name is Bosby-Shell. And they had trouble finding it because when this was taken off display in the 1960s, this certificate, which was a letter to Hayes, was filed under correspondence under his last name, Bosby-Shell. And so no one had really put together where it would have been placed. And so previous researchers had looked under Linderman, they had looked under Treasury, they had looked under U.S. Mint, they had looked under Pollock, all these different people to try to find where this certificate could have been. But Bischel and Van Allen had the idea, well, let's go look under the correspondence, see if there's anything from Bosby-Shell. And sure enough, yes, there was, and they found the certificate. This was the smoking gun that they were looking for. And it says, you can't really read it here in the script, but it says, Mint U.S. Philadelphia Coiners Department, March 11th, 1878. I hereby certify that the silver dollar enclosed in case number 1 is the first one of the dollar authorized by the Act of 1878, struck in the presses used for the regular coinage in the Mint of the United States. Signed O.C. Bosby-Shell, coiner, and J.A. Pollock, superintendent. So this sealed the deal and confirmed both through the die analysis that they did, the materialistic analysis, and through written verification that our silver dollar is in fact the original Morgan silver dollar. Our coin was analyzed yet again in 2013 by VAM World magazine. They were doing an interesting study where they were looking at the evolution of VAM die. And they noticed some variations. They knew that VAM die all have the VAM9 die coins all have these same characteristics, but they were wondering, did some of these characteristics develop over time? So, if there's 10,000 VAM9 coins, are some that were produced a little bit later have different characteristics than the very first one? Well, there's no other better way to test that than to look at the very first one ever struck. And so they came here to do some analysis. And they took some very close, very high definition magnified photography of our coin. And they did, in fact, note that our particular coin is missing some of the telltale characteristics of a VAM9 die, which led them to theorize that initially the die was maybe a little bit cleaner, and some of these particular tells of the die developed later over the course of production, which is probably what led to eventually that die having to be scrapped and replaced. And one other thing of note for our particular die that is of interest, this is on the side that has the eagle on it. You'll notice the tail feathers. There are 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That was Morgan's original design. He designed the eagle with 8 feathers in the tail, and that's actually incorrect. Previous coins had showed the eagle as with 7 feathers. The Audubon Society had a complaint that eagles actually have 7 feathers. So later editions, a revision was made with a 7-feather eagle. So if you have a Morgan silver dollar at home, you can tell if it's earlier or later. The earlier ones have the 8 tail feathers and the later ones have the 7. And the last thing I'll show you here from our collection is I mentioned we do have 2 of these in our collection. This is the other one that was produced from day 2 in our collection. This was determined to be a VAM 14-3 type die. So a little bit different run. And the mint produced thousands of these per day. They wore the dies out eventually and would have to make new ones to make more coins. And all told, something like 500 million of these coins were produced. And so they are fairly common, but there's certain kind of grades of rarity within them. But what I'm going to show you now is our silver dollar, which we have on display, which is the confirmed first Morgan silver dollar. If you ever want to visit the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museum here in Fremont, you can see it on display. So here it is. We're looking at the obverse of it. You see Lady Liberty there in profile. And that was Morgan's design. And he used a friend of his. Her name was Anna Willis Williams. He used her likeness to portray Lady Liberty. And gives it a second there to focus on it. And so we have it on display in this case, along with the certificate that's also on display. And it's an interesting object that, if you're in the coin collecting world, if you're a numismatic enthusiast, this is, kind of a pilgrimage site. People like to come and see it. But, many in the general public, they kind of go by it and they don't really recognize the significance of it. And so I'm going to show you the reverse of it as well. And it spins. But here you can see the eagle on the back, and apologize a little bit. It does kind of have a hard time focusing with the lighting. Gives you all the more reason to come by and visit us sometime. But that is some pieces that we have in our collection. And so if anybody has any questions for me, Josh, or Jennifer, feel free to type them in the comments section.
There is one question. I don't know who's the best about it. Someone said, curious about Morgan being a chief engraver at the U.S. Mint.
Jennifer, maybe?
I mean, he was the 7th one. Actually didn't do a whole lot of research on him being what he did during his engraving, just more on what he was more known for, but he was a chief engraver, the 7th one.
When he designed the Morgan silver dollar, he was
not.
He was just an assistant at that time.
Exactly.
What kind of background, education skills, etc., does one need in order to become a chief engraver for the U.S. Mint?
Well, I think it varies. I know our current chief engraver, Joe Mena, has classic training. He trained in Russia, and in the United States in Philadelphia. Um, he actually is a graphic. He does on the side. He has done also like comics, sculpting, and drawing. So um, he does more modern as well as very classical trained. So it can vary. A lot of them will have some kind of classic sculpting training um, that leads them to, as Joe was an engraver, just a regular engraver sculptor at the Mint, one of our artists, and then he was promoted to chief engraver. Um, and he just oversees the team. Most of them, we have two sort of groups. We have our sculptors are in house. We also have artists that uh, are in house as well. But we also have what's called the Artist Infusion Program, where artists can apply, and if they get selected, they're basically contracted to US Mint, so they'll work on various design portfolios, and then the chief engraver sort of oversees all of that, the conversations, is something needs to be changed, and reviews sort of the designs and aspects. And then of course the any designs for the United States Mint coins and national medals do go through what's called the US Commission of Fine Arts and the Citizens Coinage Advisory Committee for their comments before it goes to the secretary, who makes final decision on the designs for any coin or medal.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Not seeing any, so.
Oh, all right, I guess that's it. All right, well, thank you very much, Jennifer and Josh, and for doing this program with us. And I hope everybody watching learned a little bit about coinage and the Morgan silver dollar and presidential medals.
The recording has stopped.